Hey, welcome to Leadership Within, the moment for leaders to reflect on their human experience of leadership. I'm your host TK, and today I'm joined by
Vanessa.
Always the same person joining me. Hello, Vanessa. How are you today?
Maybe I should have an alter ego and today I'm Veronica.
Well, there are these digital effects that you can apply to your sound and no one would notice. Even the AI avatars can speak for us now. But then again, the real question is, would the connection be the same with our listeners? I guess that's a different topic of the podcast altogether and something that, we might be talking about. But today, there's actually an interesting thing I want to talk about. And I know that you were actually intrigued by it. So, it's about accountability. What I mean by accountability, every leader probably knows, and, speaking to many and being one myself and, helping my clients build more, is that people believe that accountability itself is incredibly important. As a leader, you would like to have the people that look up to you for leadership, people in the team, organization you lead, take accountability so stuff gets done. And yet, it's difficult to achieve, but also too much accountability can have the opposite effect. It reminds me of the situation we have, Vanessa, in our podcast. So if you are our listener for a while, you will know that every other episode is hosted by me, and then you've got Vanessa hosting every other episode. It's because we have accountability for the total of the episode, and we just switch it. That's a nice example. But the question about accountability, Vanessa, do you actually see this as an important part of leadership based on your experience and the experience of your clients as much as I do?
Yes, is the short answer. And the slightly longer answer is because I think I trust people that kind of honor their word and do what they say, and I feel safe with people like that. So therefore that makes me want to follow them more.
So do tell more, because it's interesting how you switch to what I thought was like you trust people that they will do something when they take accountability, and then you switch to an accountability of people that you look up for leadership to. So people you follow. If you can explain, is there a difference of a person that's a team member, a contributor taking accountability, and the leader taking accountability?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So I think I have been on teams where accountability is divided, but there's been members that don't pull their weight, and then the team is addressed for its lack of delivery on something, and that I find really frustrating, because it's kind of like it's on the team to figure out, where, how we address this, individual's contribution. And I think that gets messy because, as you've got no power in that situation other than collaborative kind of community distributed power. So for me, there's it's kind of like a two thing. Like, I don't like working for leaders or following leaders that aren't comfortable to have those straight conversations with individuals and the team, because I just think it gets really messy and dramatic and reactive. So
interesting. Yeah.
That's kind of the take I would have on it, just from a lived experience perspective.
No, I agree with you that these conversations are of a difficult sort, yet one would say that being clear on responsibility, on accountability, is something that can help. So, to give you an example, I've worked with a team for years that one of the people had a real problem with accountability. So what unfortunately I've been a part of designing is we didn't give ourselves clear responsibility in the team. And my rationale on that, and I can be quite headstrong, was that, well, there's so many things going on, so much around us, that if we give ourselves clear accountability, chances are that things will fall between the cracks. But if you don't assign clear accountability, it's everyone's accountability in the space of this team to handle things to the benefit of the team. And yet, well, you've got this, what you've mentioned, which is freeloading, someone not pulling their weight. So there's a difficult balance. And yeah, so where have you seen working it effectively?
That's a really good question. I think I've probably seen it. Oh, wow. You've really got, I love that. First of all, can I just say,
Go ahead.
I love that you've named freeloading, because I think that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And the kind of resentment and the frustration that comes up from that.
Yeah.
And then how do I have the conversation? So where I've,
we'll return to that.
yeah, where I've seen it work well is where, exactly as you said, at the front end, there is clarity of role and who's going to do what and how will we know and all of that kind of stuff. And that's been agreed. Where I see it not working so well is where that's a bit, nebulous. And so we're kind of figuring it out, but not really wanting to step on people's shoes. And, so we're doing too much of the kind of emotional checking in and sense checking and worrying about, whether we upset someone or whatever. And actually it's very difficult to align around, but hold on a second, we're here to deliver X.
Yeah, especially when no one wants to take charge and think themselves as someone that, initiates this conversation. But the freeloading conversation obviously is an interesting one, right? So, well, it happens. I'm sure that many of our listeners have experienced it too. And a big question is, how do you normalize this? How do you have the conversation? How do you, deal with it? What have you seen working and not working, Vanessa?
Well, so I see what doesn't work is when you go and tell somebody else about it. So if I think about, sometimes I might co-lead with someone and, I know they're super busy and they've got, they've got work to do outside of this work. And so there's a million reasons why I can excuse their behavior of not delivering or not showing up or, like just kind of going, okay, well, you do that bit. Is that okay? And so I have often in the past, confession time here, kind of felt like that's a really strong personality that's doing that behavior. There's a real dominance in them and maybe an arrogance that I'm picking up. And therefore I don't want to address it. So then I've gone to someone, like the ops person or someone else and said, oh my God, this is driving me crazy. And so, which is really unhelpful. So I think what I've learned is that that's one of my edges, and that's where I have to dig deep and have the conversation that says, I'm sure you're not intending this impact. And what's showing up for me is I feel like I'm doing a lot of the lifting here. Can we address that? And it's just that edge that I feel around, they're going to think this, whatever, that I just have to face into.
It's a big one, right? And you've confessed and shared, like me, maybe talk about like my experience that I think didn't work. So you've mentioned talking directly about it, right? And one would assume that this is like an obvious advice. It's just like address it, be direct about it. And yes, I completely acknowledge your challenges and edges around it, and not that I don't have them myself. And sometimes when this situation takes a long time developing, obviously it can burst. And I remember a particular time when it had for me, and I addressed it directly with, let's call them a freeloader. So so this was like, a reflection slot, a good time to talk about it, actually. I think, the situation was such that this conversation was at the right place at the right time. And I essentially unloaded, saying, look, this and that, you haven't done this, I've seen your engagement, I wanted this has happened. I was trying my best to utilize my best principles of nonviolent communication, being open, but obviously I was quite emotional, and especially when you list from a certain time, all the things, all the mishaps and grievance you have, it did get emotional. But I addressed it directly. I talked about what I want and so on. And the response I've got was quite peculiar. The person said, TK, I don't think you really trust me. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know how to deal with it, because the truth was that I didn't. I then vowed to trust the person. They betrayed my trust and our collaboration has ended. But at this particular time, I was not necessarily expecting a particular result. You see, in my mind, what happens is often when you address it, what happens is you get the pushback. Sometimes you get very unexpected 100%. One, right? Yeah. Sometimes someone responds with something that is completely ridiculous. I won't give the exact example of it, but I remember that I had I gave someone some very hard numeric evidence of them freeloading, here is the Excel and here's the numbers. And they gave a response that was completely tangential and anything. I was like, how the hell can you address it like this? So the real question is, we can be theoretical here as we maybe we have some positive experiences. I'll try to look for it myself. How can we do this productively? How can we address it directly in such a way that, it will work?
Yeah. So I think it starts with yourself and kind of going, what assumptions am I making here? And that ladder of inference, so I know that when I'm pissed off, I make assumptions about what's going on for someone else, and I make meaning out of it. And then I create this whole narrative, and the narrative is built around my feeling of frustration and unfairness. So in that narrative, it's their problem. And I hear that in the guy that said to you, or woman that said to you, hey, I don't feel you trust me, which is an interesting statement to make, right? It's saying something about him, I think, or her. But so for me, there's that starting point of, okay, what am I assuming? And question mark, am I open to any kind of influence in this conversation? Because I know for me that often I'll say I'm open, but if I'm holding assumptions, I'm not open. And I think once I've then done that, I can then kind of go into a conversation thinking about, okay, what is it that I want to have happen here? What's the conversation and what's the future focus of that conversation that is actually helpful? Because what I find is I get stuck sometimes. I've had a really similar situation to you recently where someone says, look, hey, I think what you did was unfair. And here's why I think it's unfair. And then, and I see a pattern here and I think, okay, so the easiest thing for me to do then is make myself wrong and go, yeah. God, I can see how you have that perspective, and God, I need to change. And what I realized in a recent situation like this was that actually what I needed to do was look at how am I showing up? What am I feeling? And own that and share that. And then say, and here's what I'm wanting, because you've got your perspective, I've got my perspective, and you're subtly trying to make me wrong. And now I want to make you wrong. And we're going to get nowhere like this.
You see, no. I would say that, and nonviolent and lack of blame can be a great way of having this conversation. Yet, to be absolutely honest with you, Vanessa, you feel blame sometimes.
Yeah,
you feel like it's someone's fault, right? So,
yeah.
so my way of dealing it is just acknowledging that, hey, I feel like this and that. I feel like it's unfortunately your fault, and you can hear me blunting it. So doing it without blame might not necessarily work, and I'm just wondering, how can you, or what would be your advice to get yourself in a state that you can have this conversation in the best way possible to be the most effective, right?
So how can you? I think it's like knowing your pattern, right? Because blame, I used to think blame was me going, TK, it's your fault. And that was it, right? It was, or someone else, it's your fault. So it was out there, me projecting something onto someone and saying it's your fault. But actually what I realized, and it was Brené Brown, she's got this great little video, we can put it in the show notes, about, blame giving you some semblance of control. And the idea that actually, if you blame yourself, then actually that gives you a feeling of control. And so from that, I started to realize, oh my God, I've got this really big pattern around self-blame, right? I've got high expectations on myself. I'm ambitious. I want, there's things that I want. And when things aren't going right and someone throws something back at me, it's really easy for me to go, yeah. Oh God, I must be a shit, whatever, right? I did wrong. And I've started to realize that actually what I'm not doing is standing up for who I am, how I roll, what's important to me. So I'm lacking leadership when I'm doing that thing that just kind of acquiesces and goes, oh yeah, okay, I'll just blame myself. It's an easy out for me,
For many people, I think, yeah.
So now what I'm trying to do is like kind of stand there and go, okay, I've heard, so let me just check. This is what I've heard you say. Have I got it right? And I imagine that you're feeling this, and they'll go, yeah. And then I'll go, okay. And here's where I'm at. Here's what's going on for me. And I did it recently in this situation, and it was so liberating because for once I said, I feel like I'm between a rock and a hard place. It's like I'm trying to adapt to all these different things, to be all these different people, and it's not working, and I'm done with it. So actually what I want to do now is to stand in, my truth, know that I'm going to make a mess sometimes and have these kind of conversations. Are you okay with that?
Oh, that's quite brilliant.
Well, it's work.
It is.
I'd rather do the other thing and just blame myself. It's so much easier, but it has such a cost emotionally.
It does, right? So we've talked about the direct way of talking about the act of taking accountability, giving feedback when accountability is not taken, or there's freeloading. But we also talked about previously, before this particular line of conversation, about when it's not clear, when we set out a mission and we want people through their engagement to fall into taking their own accountability. Now, you've said that, it doesn't always work out, but can you envision a situation when it does?
Yeah, I think... Well, I can envision one at home, right? Where, we need to distribute the workload. How many times have I mentioned this? But do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I can see a world where we are clear on who does what, when that's done, and we are acknowledging the progress that we're making. I can see a world like that. Yeah.
So this is something I've been thinking about for a long time in terms of like organization theory and how leadership really works, and what are the different models based, on my research, my own experience. And I've been ruminating, is this how it can work? If people are really driven by the common mission, they will actually take, accountability themselves. This won't be a conversation that needs to happen. Or is it just myself maybe, making up dream scenarios that are not compatible with our human nature, right? Idealistic and so on. Can't solve it yet. Don't have a definite answer. I theoretically have seen glimpses of the fact that it can work, but it might not be sustainable. And now we get to the point that you've mentioned, which is, family is an example of it. Because when there's a long-term relationship we have with someone on, whatever basis is, we might be unable to easily exercise influence. We might not be able to shift the status quo, as in, the Hellinger's constellations of what it is. A family is a good example because you live day in, day out, right, for years and years. But, business partnerships, romantic, whatever it is, right? Theoretically, there might be, a situation when there's an imbalance. There might be a situation when someone is unhappy how things are going in this particular relationship, yet because they might have given the other person feedback, they might have wanted to set the boundaries or whatever, change something, and it has not worked before, there's a certain immunity that develops. And that's a difficult one that I myself encountered in a long-term business relationship where I felt like I just couldn't change anything because the other person or people were just immune to any of my usual ways of changing. Have you seen that?
Yeah, you're making me think because do you remember we did Auth certification together?
Yes, we did.
And I was the constellation for the family system.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Ooh, vaguely, but still, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so everyone stood up and they constellated my family system. And at the time I was married and I had these frustrations like, I can't change things. And then, it wasn't on my radar, but I then get divorced. And weirdly enough, if I was to reconstellate, there are similar dynamics going, and my ex-husband isn't there. I mean, he kind of is in the background, but what I've realized is that it's part of those roles, isn't it, that we step into and that we recreate. And I think in answer to your question, for me, there's this whole thing about how am I setting things up for myself? Where are my non-negotiables? Where are the kind of persistent issues that are just always going to be there, and how can I meet them differently so that I don't run patterns of frustration and stuff like that? But it to me, that was fascinating. Like, oh my God, I used to moan that my ex didn't do certain things, and now I'm saying the same conversation to my daughter.
So I guess, isn't the answer that we should be aware of this happening? Maybe even forgive ourselves, but just the awareness will help us behave differently. Maybe stop the games we're playing with ourselves.
Exactly. And, and that's exactly it. It's like, how can I then see that actually I've got this narrative and construct in my head about who I have to be? And actually, is that true? Like, do I have to, do
so what's the
things?
techniques that we can recommend our listeners to actually reflect on that? What's the best way for us to unearth this for ourselves? So the story don't repeat ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's what's the story that I'm telling myself? Like, I have to have a really tidy house all the time. I have to have things organized. We have to have 5 fruit and veg every day. I mean, I can go on and on and on, right? But it's like, okay, is that true? And is that really sustainable? As you said, you used the word sustainability. And I think, okay, what it then takes you back to what's truly important for you and where do you want to put your energy?
And if I may add something to this, is just the forgiveness, because this line of, questioning yourself will lead you to a lot of existential questions and dread. And you will find that the deeper you dig, the more you might not like the answers. And what I usually try to impress, maybe, help my clients understand is we're all human, and that's perfectly okay to seek to be a work in progress. And it's even better if we forgive ourselves.
Totally.
Well, we can only encourage our listeners to have an exercise like that. Let us know. You can always find us on all the platforms, on LinkedIn and everywhere. What is the story? Maybe you'd like to share something. Maybe you'd like to add some topic we can discuss on our podcast. But until then, we thank you for you being here, listening to us, and we hope to see you again or feel you again in our next episode. Bye-bye.